IT professionals, mark your calendars. Zero Trust World 2025 is happening in Orlando, Florida, February 19th to the 21st. This event is tailored for IT leaders and cybersecurity experts who want actionable insights on zero trust strategies, practical solutions for modern threats, and meaningful connections with industry peers. Plus, take advantage of hands-on cyber hero boot camps, expert-led sessions, and the chance to earn CPE credits and your cyber hero certificate. Save $200 on your in-person registration using discount code ZTWSW25 at securityweekly.com/ZTW2025. Reserve your spot now. Graylog elevates enterprise-level cybersecurity through its comprehensive SIEM, centralized log management, and API security solutions. Built on the Graylog platform, Graylog Security combines SIEM, security analytics, threat detection, and incident response capabilities. Unlike traditional SIEMs, which offer complex and costly setups, Graylog Security simplifies security and operational challenges with an optimal blend of licensing, people, and infrastructure costs. To see a demo, visit securityweekly.com/Graylog. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. We have a few extra co-hosts who have just joined us. Welcome, Katie. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. You missed it earlier, but today is National Pie Day.
Oh.
And apparently some people have taken that to mean pizza pie, though I never think of pizza as pie, so I don't know. As you do.
I prefer the sweet variety of pie. What's your favorite type of pie, Adrian?
My favorite type of, I'm not sure if I've never eaten a lot of pie, so apple pies, I guess. I do like I like hand
what?
pie.
Oh, hand pie is good.
Yeah. Yeah, a whole pie just seems like too much. I should not be trusted around a whole pie. It
Well,
needs to
nobody
come
said
small.
you had to eat it all in one go. I am not judging. I am not judging, but nobody said you had to.
I don't always have the best self-control, but like the little empanada-shaped ones, that's, if it comes in a serving size, that's safer to have around me.
Do you mean the ones that used to come, you could get them for like your lunch with like chocolate or lemon or apple, and they actually left a layer of lard inside your mouth when you ate them? Are those the pies you're talking about?
Oh dear.
Yeah, I was a vegetarian growing up, so I couldn't eat those. But yeah, desserts where beef fat is like the second or third ingredient.
Yeah,
good stuff. Chef kiss. We also have Jason Wood with us. How you doing, Jason?
I'm doing well and enjoying the pie conversation. Now I'm thinking about pumpkin pie.
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, pumpkin pie is a good one. I should have chosen that. I do like a pecan pie as well.
Yeah, that's not bad too, but pumpkin's my kryptonite.
Pumpkin. Okay.
Interesting.
It's a good one. Sweet potatoes.
Note, if I ever need to curry favor, make Jason pumpkin pie.
That would probably get you somewhere.
All right, let's jump in. We got some interesting stuff that we might take a little bit to chat about, so we should go ahead and jump into it. So first of all, money getting thrown around. We've got our first IPO. And also I want to mention for the people listening, I have a lot of snarky notes, more than usual, in the show notes today. So if you want to check out those show notes or get links to the stuff that we're talking about, you can go to securityweekly.com/ESW391. That is the number of this episode, 391. So yeah, SailPoint, IPO, first IPO since 2021. By my counting, because I'm not counting Rubrik, because I feel like they're a backup company who kind of has, like, they've pivoted into cybersecurity, but I'm still not sure I would put them wholly in that category. This is the first pure play, I feel like, if I throw the term pure play in there, IPO that we've had in 3.5 years. And ironically, that company 3.5 years ago that IPO'd was ForgeRock, which was taken private by the same company that took SailPoint private, who is the same company also putting SailPoint back out on the public market. Craziness. And ForgeRock was merged with Ping Identity. So Thoma Bravo is just all in on identity plays, it seems.
It's interesting. The IPO market obviously dried up, and that was, pre 2022. There was a lot of activity, and every company wanted to go IPO. Everybody wanted to be in Times Square. Everybody wanted to be on the New York Stock Exchange.
Those pictures in front of the NASDAQ.
Yeah. And then things changed, and I think I would have seen this coming. Maybe it's just the companies that I've worked for, because, they've stated their intent to be those big companies. They've wanted to, they don't want to just grow and get acquired. They have this world domination approach. I'm not sure that's necessarily the right approach to take in cybersecurity, but I'm not surprised to see it back. And considering the economic and political climate we're in, I think we're going to see a lot more activity this year. I don't think we're going to see the IPOs that we saw, late teens.
Previously.
I don't see that happening, but I think there's a little bit of a hunger in our industry to make that big splash, to make those big headlines, to make sure that cybersecurity stays at the forefront. We've had, we're getting into another number here, but we've had some big cybersecurity announcements in the last couple of days. And I think people are a little uneasy from, the folks I've just been talking to briefly in the last day or two, a little uneasy as to what's going to happen with our industry. And so it wouldn't be surprising to see these companies who are in a position to get into the mainstream media with announcements, with what they can do, with how they can help national security. I just think we're going to see.
Talking about the current administration maybe de-emphasizing cyber,
changing it. Let's say changing.
You don't have to mince words on this podcast. Listen, Katie, you can just say it like you feel.
I just don't want to ruin it. I'm also writing a blog about it, so I don't want to.
Oh, you don't want to spoil the blog? Okay.
I don't want to spoil the blog. I don't necessarily see them de-emphasizing cybersecurity. I don't necessarily see the best decisions being made about it, though. I think there's an inherent mistrust of our industry.
I think de-emphasizing requires active attention. And I think it's more just negligence. Just I don't think they care about it one way or the other. Like very little attention has been played to it publicly. And I mean with CSRB being in the middle of that report, just as sweeping like DHS, we're just gonna hit the reset button on all this stuff. Maybe they'll eventually find out, oh yeah, actually we want that Salt Typhoon report that the CSRB was working on, and they'll get those gears going again. But yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I found out in the previous segment, me and Jackie, I think, are on the same page with going public not really being the best choice for a cybersecurity company. Because it does kind of restrict your movement and your ability to in cyber. You got to be ready to pivot, change your business model, like all kinds of stuff. It changes very quickly. And you just
the IPO market, just to take a step back, the IPO market didn't just dry up, right? That's not what happened. So yes, IPOs have fallen off, but it wasn't just COVID economics. It was SPACs. So special acquisition corporations really took the place of IPO for a lot of those small to mid-size vendors who normally would have gone through IPO and just kind of rolled the dice. As the market got more and more choppy post-COVID, it was a lot safer to set up a SPAC and go public that way. So I don't.
Initially, it was safer.
Initially.
And then they all imploded, right?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, but as do IPOs, right? So the first 15 years of my adult life I spent in finance, and 7 of those, nobody throw anything at me, were at SVB. So I watched plenty of companies IPO and implode, or IPO and then get brought private again within 18 months and dismantled. So I think that, it's a good sign that we're seeing another IPO. I think, like we talked about in the last segment, the fact that it's coming it's a company coming back out of private acquisition to IPO gives me the ick. But but in this economy and in this capitalistic system, we like to privatize gains and socialize losses. So that's just the way it goes. I don't see the IPO market fully recovering to pre-pandemic levels.
No, just to be clear, I don't either. But I do see this as a mechanism to try to keep security a little more front and center in considering everything else that's going on.
Mm-hmm. And possibly Wiz and Netscope. I feel like there have been several cybersecurity companies in the wings, like ready to IPO if it made sense to IPO, and just haven't. And Netscope's one of those where, I think they were talking about being ready to IPO back in like 2018, 2019, something like that. And it just didn't make sense for them. So they just haven't. And I think that's why I included number 2 here about Databricks raising $15 billion in financing. Look, they didn't have to give up any of that control to raise that financing. That's probably a lot more money than they would have raised going public. And where's the incentive to go public? Like you got to hire a CFO that's gone public before. You got to do all this crap with your books. You got to make your numbers look like there's this whole treadmill you jump on if you're preparing to.
It's a massive cost.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And just to lose flexibility and agility as a company for less money.
Yeah. And for me, it goes back to this. So I'm a believer that there should be pretty firm restrictions on the types of companies that can be public. So I don't think that it's ethical for medical companies to be public because, again, as soon as you're public, legally, your number one priority is returning profit to your shareholders. So I think, not that I'm going to redesign capitalism today, but there's a fundamental question here as to whether it is moral or in the interest of our national security, cybersecurity in general, that these companies be legally obligated to do something other than produce the best security outcomes possible for their customers. And and how many 8 and 9 figure raises have we seen in the last 12 months absent IPO? Wiz raised $1 billion. Like I could probably list 15 companies who've raised over $500 million in the last 12, 18 months. So again, it's probably just not necessary.
Trying to remember the Hippocratic Oath. It's something like first do no harm unless there's profit in it. Is that it? Is that how that
first do no harm unless you have shareholders, and then first return the profits.
It does change companies, though. I mean, I've been at a couple of places that were private. They went public. The 2 I'm thinking of were good companies. They continued to be good companies, but I can tell you it changed the feel inside the company, how decisions were made, what became important, when did they do something, because they had that quarter that they had to do an announcement on. And it gets a little strange at times and frustrating to watch things, hang on, we've got to wait until this, then we can do that. And, like you said, flexibility gets impaired at that point. Now, obviously, if somebody invests a ton of money in it a funding raise or something like that, you could end up with somebody who pumps a bunch of money in trying to force what they want. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting trade-off.
Yeah. And in almost that same period of time, I forget what the period of time it was. I don't know if you remember, Katie. I think this was a comment Tyler made a while back. We saw something like 13 companies taken private, and then only one go IPO. So, that's a trend if I've ever seen one. Cybersecurity companies, to be clear. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely goes back to the earlier comments about agility, being able to pivot. Being able to, it's both good and bad, right? You want to react to the market. On the other hand, you don't want to overreact to the market or what you're hearing. I've recently spoken with head of a company who is very, very in the weeds, more than that this person should be, and trying to change the messaging so that it reflects what's being seen in mainstream media. And you can't overreact. You can't be overly agile. I think in cybersecurity, you have to have a mission and you have to have a plan to meet that mission for your buyers, your customers, your partners, your stakeholders. So while you need to be able to react, you don't want, we see the, first time CEO syndrome of them chasing the latest buzzword. It's why when you go to RSA, everybody's an AI company or whatever the word of the month is, right? You don't want to be overly reactive. But that nimbleness is part of being, especially a smaller company, but even, if you're a bigger company and you see an opportunity, whether if it's building something out or buying another company to, make your portfolio more rich and robust, it makes a difference, but there are pros and cons, I think. I mean, you could argue both sides of this.
Yeah. I think sometimes it can provide the funding. I don't know. I survived the financial crisis at Fidelity, and Fidelity is a privately held company. So while all of the other brokers were laying off like 20, 30, 50% of their staff, we laid off like 2%. And had we been a publicly traded company, we wouldn't have been able to make that decision. And so I think, I actually saw an interesting write-up the other day about women-owned companies and how some of the largest companies who are women-owned have all of these contingency plans in place to keep them from having to do a reduction in force as a reactionary, a thing to some type of market movement. There was one company that was saying they keep 12 months of employee salary kind of in savings at all times, so that if the market really goes sideways, they can make that critical decision. And if you're a publicly traded company and you think your shareholders and investors are going to let you make that decision, you're living in a fantasy. Because unless
they choose
I do want to advocate for the Public Benefit Corporation, though, because if you're not set up as a Schedule C, you can become a corporation that doesn't have to have their number one priority be returning profit to your shareholders. It just requires a much different structure than most companies would be comfortable with establishing.
I've been seeing more and more of those lately.
Yeah. Signal's a public benefit corporation.
Yeah. I've been seeing a lot of press releases that companies are like reincorporating. I don't know if that's the right term, but switching over to that model.
Yeah. And I think in security, if you really care about outcomes and your ability to maintain control over outcomes, it's a phenomenal way to not have to prioritize profits over people.
Yeah. That's great. All right. I think I want to do something completely different and jump over to these because I definitely want to cover these vulnerabilities here. So we've got two items, both regarding firewalls, vendor next-gen firewall companies. So story number 12 and 13, those numbers might change because I noticed number 7 is also titled vulnerabilities. And now it's bothering me that I don't have them grouped together. So I am somewhere on the OCD spectrum. I'm not sure exactly where, but wherever that is, it's where this is bothering me. So, but so we've got one that links to Mastodon, Kevin Beaumont, who just prolific at, breaking stories, even though he's not a journalist. Covering this huge leak of FortiGate configs. And this is kind of a trend that we've seen, I think, with cybercrime. I guess we would call it cybercrime, where, the vulnerability comes out and they just hack, somebody writes a script and they just hit 100% of it that's accessible from the public internet, right? And I guess initial access vendors makes a whole lot of sense if your whole business model is selling access into enterprises. You want to jump on that 0 day and just, the moment that there's an RCE, you want to own 100% of what's out there so that you can then sell it off to a ransomware crew or somebody who's going to use that access to do something further. And then the other one was just broken by Eclipsium this morning. I saw Paul Asadorian, who, for listeners who don't know, started the Security Weekly podcasts. I was very excited about that coming out. So where do we want to start here? Maybe come to you, Jason. I think you had the least to say about the public market stuff, the market conversation. So I'll let you start here.
Well, I mean, look at that FortiGate I dumped there by Kevin Beaumont and your comments about the initial access brokers. Yeah, I mean, diving all over that makes total sense for them because you get access into an organization. They want to spin that off and sell it as quick as they can before somebody notices it gets closed up. And, they want that to get to whoever's buying this stuff with them to have access. Now it's your own problem, whether or not you get caught or whatever. But I mean, I've thought about, you've got a number of firewall vendors out there. FortiGate here, Ivanti has a lot of problems with their firewalls being vulnerable and stuff like that. And here are the devices that we put out here that are, since day one in security almost, the device
products.
Yeah, the device. And congratulations, it's completely owned. And what are they saying here? How many? 15,000 firewalls.
The number,
complete with configurations and let's see here,
VPN passwords.
Yeah. That was a shocker to me. Is that in 2020? Well, so apparently this happened in 2022, and they're just now releasing the data. Okay. But the shocker to me, VPN usernames and passwords are in plain text in the configs.
Well, is that VPN username and passwords, or is that like VPN passwords, like point to point, tunnels between firewalls?
I don't know. There's not enough detail to tell.
Yeah, I was trying to find that.
I'm not clicking on the GitHub, so
I'll do it.
But yeah, also all the firewall rules for each of those 15,000 IPs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's as bad as it gets.
This is something where it's a couple years old, so you're right. For the vast majority of companies, if they're on this list, they've probably already patched the vulnerability from 2022 that allowed these things to be.
But did they change all the passwords?
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So you probably still need to start an incident if your IP's in this GitHub just to make sure that all of those things have actually been patched, all of the credentials have been rotated. I think the bigger thing here is that with this particular vendor, with Fortinet, this is, I think, the third time in the last 12 months that some type of data breach data has ended up on the internet, and we found out that way through a researcher, not through a disclosure from the company themselves. So either their pen testing sucks, they don't have great threat intelligence research, I don't know. But it's a little bit inexcusable to have this level of market share and not disclose these types of things or not be aware of them. That's even worse.
Yeah, I mean, and it looks like there was a CVE back in 2022 for this, and I guess this was all grabbed when that was a 0-day years ago. But some percentage of those customers are just not going to get to it. There is a long tail of, because some of these Fortinet devices are tiny, right? Like these are small office, maybe even home office, definitely like retail stores, stuff like that. Like, these little boxes are going to be, have like 4 Ethernet ports on them, 5 Ethernet ports on them max, and sub $1,000 a piece probably, or right around $1,000. And some of these companies, like maybe they don't have good asset management. They don't even know these things are still there. So, I think it probably could have been a lot worse than 15,000. But yeah, there will be a long tail of stuff that just doesn't get patched. But yeah, I think the worst thing is, the fact that you're able to get any kind of clear text, like whatever, if those are point to point or if those are user VPNs, in the 2020s at all, we shouldn't be seeing plain text passwords coming off security products.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, appliance firewalls, especially. I used to work as an infrastructure sysadmin. You start to touch something like this, and I know the next article from Eclipsium includes like F5 gets mentioned and whatnot. You start to touch those devices, everybody's tension ramps way up because you don't break one thing when you do this. You break all of the things. And I broke all of the things once. It happens. And so you've got the long tail of people not knowing that they even have these devices. But even the ones that do are just like, oh my gosh, do I want to do this? What's the risk? When am I going to be, or the sysadmin or the firewall folks want to do it, but the business is like, don't touch it. It's stable.
Yeah.
Leave it there. Just change the password. It'll be fine. Yeah.
And then leave it in plain text.
And leave it in plain text.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've often said, the most disruptive thing you can do to an environment is patching, right? Is change something when it's all working.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of it's really hard to quantify risk, conceptual risk for most companies. So it's like, okay, there's a 1 in 5,000 chance that this becomes an issue. There's a 1 in 4 chance that if we try to fix it, we're going to take the network down for at least a couple hours. Yeah. So they're like, okay, the cost of network outage is going to be like $500,000, but there's a 5% chance of a $10 million issue. It's like, oh, well, obviously the chance is the lower cost. So it's just, it's one of those things where CISOs are not insurance actuaries, and they're just kind of trying to choose the least crappy option. And unfortunately, we still haven't come up with a good framework for kind of valuing these types of risks.
Yeah. Well, so there is a framework to kind of replace this whole philosophy, and you can kind of see the book right above my thumb here. But Kelly Shortridge has a book called Security Chaos Engineering, and it's all about how to get away from this, if we touch something, it might break, so resilience is going to be a buzzword, I think this year, more so than ever. And it very much is this conversation that we're having, this idea that, infrastructure shouldn't be fragile, that it should break. And in fact, you should be the one doing the breaking and understanding all the ways that it can break so that you can then prevent that from happening. And I think ransomware has kind of accelerated this for a lot of companies, where now I hear insurance companies asking organizations like, what's your time to rebuild everything? What's your time to rebuild the infrastructure? And some of these cloud first companies that haven't been around very long, they can cloud formation and Terraform, shit from 0 to 100, overnight almost. And other companies, the Deltas of the world, where the CEOs, on live TV talking about trying to recover their 40,000 Windows servers from CrowdStrike. Like, my head exploded. I was like, 40,000 Windows servers in 2024? Like, that's just that's a nightmare waiting to happen, without CrowdStrike. Trying to like how many of those should be containers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think one of the interesting things is that if you're doing business with anybody in Europe, DORA just took effect. So the Digital Operational Resiliency Act. So I agree as well. So I think one of the good things I see coming out of the change of leadership at CISA is that CISA is going, per their most recent press release, going to start focusing more on resiliency and on hardware hardening. Because I think the threat to critical infrastructure from China and other threat actors is kind of the most pressing issue right now. And so DORA was just passed in Europe, which basically mandates that you have, for financial entities at least, you have a whole host of resiliency and contingency plans in place. So hopefully, we're starting with financial companies, but I agree that we should be getting to a place where resiliency is the norm and is budgeted into a project, not just the cost of the project, but also the cost of resiliency. Because, Yeah, I always say that every entity should have a oh shit bucket, where if one of your vendors is compromised, you need to have storage waiting to take all that raw data so that you can just turn the flow off and direct it somewhere else. Because I agree, there shouldn't be a situation where a single failure in a single vendor shuts down travel across all of the major countries in the Western Hemisphere,
except for Southwest. Because they're using Commodore 64. That was the meme, right?
That day was the only day in 15 years I have flown Delta. Because I couldn't get a Southwest flight to Oklahoma City where I had to go. And wouldn't you know it, the one day, because I've had a companion pass. I've flown Southwest for so long, which you have to do I think 150,000 miles in a year. But yeah, I definitely ended up sleeping on a floor in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh. Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah. But as these things become law, I mean, it may only be in Europe and it may only be for financial companies, but large companies aren't going to be able to segment that way, right? So the hope is that by taking the first step, this becomes like an umbrella regulation that companies just kind of tune to in general, not just for their European subsidiaries.
Yeah, so when I see vulnerabilities like this, I think, no wonder Google and Amazon and, these big cloud vendors decided to make their own hardware, especially for switch gear, for network gear, for stuff like that. Like one of the vulnerabilities here on one of these next gen firewalls. So a lot of firmware have image parsing libraries. They have these image parsing libraries so that on boot, you can see a pretty image as the computer is booting. This is a firewall. There is no HDMI port on the back of it. There's no display port. There's no way to see it boot. And yet it still has this image library. And one of the vulnerabilities here is called logo fail. And it's an exploit from the image parsing library that doesn't need to be there because nobody can see it booting. It's just infuriating. It reminds me of, I love this story of why AWS didn't have to reboot all customer instances when the Venom vulnerability came out years ago. So Venom was a vulnerability in the Zen hypervisor, and most of the cloud providers used Zen, and most of them had to reboot all customer instances to patch it. Because it was the hypervisor that was underlying all the VMs that they're running in the cloud. So EC2 did not have to get rebooted. None of Amazon stuff had to be rebooted because the vulnerability was in the virtual floppy controller. And when Amazon decided to start using Zen, they forked it and they do a code review and they go through and they say, what can we get rid of? What do we not need in the cloud? Floppies. We do not need floppies in the cloud. Get that code out of here. So when that vulnerability was discovered, they weren't affected because they tore out the floppy code, just like this next-gen firewall vendor should have torn out the image parsing library because you don't need it there.
Yeah.
It's just extra attack surface that's going to bite you, and today is the day that it bit.
Does anybody ever get a performance bonus at performance review time for taking things out of code?
They should. That was an interesting thing in AWS. Every time I talked to AWS, because I went to reInvent for a number of years when I was an industry analyst, and I got to talk to Stephen Schmidt, who ran security for AWS. And every year, his goals were we're trying to reduce engineering's access by 80% to customer instances. All their goals were about resiliency, about removing the opportunity for somebody to make a dumb mistake, that shuts down a bunch of customer stuff or, hurts customers. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And
I wish more people were incentivized on, making things more efficient and making things, to your point, decreasing the attack surface. Because I agree, a lot of times you start with 12-year-old code, and if it doesn't break, you just keep adding to it. Nobody ever goes back in to figure out what can be taken away.
Yesterday, I was at a OWASP chapter meeting, and we were talking about something right up against this, and it was the tension between, fixing the things that we know are problems, be that performance-wise or resiliency or security or whatever it is, versus we've got to roll out the new shiny feature, and the pressure that comes that direction. And, somebody made the comment that, the product development team, product managers, I mean, they control what's coming out, what's in the pipeline, who gets to work on things. And they have no interest in ripping things out or anything like that. It's where are we going? We don't care about that anymore because it's working. So we're going to move on.
Mm-hmm.
Which one's easier to map to business value?
Yeah. Nobody's ever done a press release being like, hey, we took this 6 dependencies out of Python and this and these 4 Python packages. Yeah. Because the investors don't get really hot and bothered by that.
Amazing.
Our S-bomb is 30% smaller.
I mean, that would be a big deal to me. I'd be impressed.
I mean, I can tell you that certain AppSec platform companies are thinking about these things. It's harder to sell. And we're all about, the end result. And the reality is, that all of these things would be great, but nobody's incentivized. And the money is where they think they can sell more, they can get in deeper, they can sell not just more, but more broadly. And it's speed. It's all about velocity and, circling back around, getting to that acquisition, getting to that IPO. Those are the goals. If we really, as an industry, had the incentives to be better, I think things would change drastically, like really majorly drastically. And I don't want to be a grim reaper or anything, but I think there are a lot of companies out there whose goals aren't necessarily to make good security products.
Yeah. We have evidence of this, right? But
I think it starts out that way.
Yeah,
I do too. I agree. I think the original intent is, hey, I'm going to do this better. But then you have
just erodes over time.
Pressures from myriad stakeholders. Even if you're a private little company, you've got the infighting. It always happens. You've got
this is a software issue. This is a product issue, not a cybersecurity product issue.
Yeah. It's a capitalism issue, right? Because you've always
incentives.
I was talking to my husband the other day about value stocks are dead. Nobody wants a value stock anymore. Nobody wants a company that just returns a consistent profit. It always has to be up and up and up.
Yeah.
And looking at, you probably saw the video that circulated on social media of the economist testifying to Congress. And he was showing that in the last 10 years, 50% of the markup in cost of goods sold went to corporate profits, which is a historic high by 100%. And so that's the thing is we are in this post.com, we've been in this perpetual VC and private equity cycle where even if you don't have those investors, you have to compete with those companies. And so it's all of these companies trying to achieve these double-digit returns year over year. And you don't do that by going back to basics. You don't do that by re-engineering your underlying code stack. You don't do that by, slowing down revenue so that you can make better product choices. And it's the whole treadmill. And we have to decide as an industry that it's in the best interest of national security and cybersecurity to get off that treadmill. But the investors are going to have to decide that too, which is not an easy sell.
I mean, next-gen firewalls that have CrowdStrike, these products that have this enormous footprint. Let's just start there, okay? Let's just start with the stuff that's very accessible, very vulnerable, very targeted. And then we can talk about the other stuff, right? We can prioritize this for sure. Yeah, I think we can all agree that the next gen antivirus and the next gen, and they're both called next gen, and yet.
So was Star Trek, and nothing from that was real either.
You need better naming conventions. That's it. That's the real takeaway here.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, so coming from finance, my working theory this year that I'm writing about a lot is that the financial framework, like regulatory and compliance framework, is the only one robust enough to adapt for cybersecurity. So I actually think you're going to start seeing, well, who knows the next couple years if CISA is not as effective, but so banks, systemically important financial institutions, are held to a higher standard of care than small banks and credit unions. So we need something similar. And up until the SolarWinds prosecutions, we really had not seen a security company held responsible for significant compromise. And so there needs to be some type of equivalent of a fiduciary duty for all security companies, but then some enhanced, protections for companies that are systemically important, the Ciscos, the CrowdStrikes, the Splunk, even Datadog, like companies that are holding petabytes of data that if something goes wrong will have a significant impact. Amazon, Google, Microsoft. So I'm as much of a wild child as I am a big compliance person because I think that we need to set firm rules for things that impact populations that have no control over them.
The market's not going to do it for us.
No.
Yeah, I mean that's clear at this point.
No, it's really concerning because, and this is part of what I've been writing about all day today, is you would hope that in the absence of compliance and regulations, I can argue both sides. I have friends, colleagues, coworkers who believe one thing or the other, right? I'm taking no stand on whether compliance is good or bad because you can make claims for both things being good or both things being bad. But in the absence of compliance, we need individuals and companies to step up and do the right thing without a watchdog. And I think that's a very hard bar to meet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I was thinking about this. Like, we already have like certifications for companies, right? So you get your like SOC 2. Mm-hmm. But part of the SOC 2 is an attestation. It is not a certification of anything. Right. It's you attesting to your security practices. Yeah.
It's a self-grade. Yeah.
You could walk into a room full of 1,000 people at RSA and say, raise your hand if you've ever read one of your vendor's SOC 2 attestations, and maybe 3 hands in the room will go up. Because I was dealing with an incident response to a vendor compromise the other day, and first, the vendor didn't have a SOC 2 at all. And I was like, well, what about your other vendors? What do their attestations look like? Oh, we don't require SOC 2s. Sometimes they send them. We need to read them? Like, and you start reading the SOC 2 and you're like, they literally told you this was a vulnerability 18 months ago. You could have read this and prevented all of these issues by requiring something in your statement of work to address this. And yeah, so like we have some mechanisms, but there's the degree to which I think companies understand that they need to give a shit is variable.
They're just betting on being able to skirt by.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, just vendor management in general, it's again, you have to do prioritization there, right? Like, you require a SOC 2 from all your vendors and you read them all. Like there's no money in the budget to staff that many people to do that much stuff. So maybe you just have AI read all the SOC 2s. Maybe AI is writing the SOC 2s. And AI, and this kind of leads me into, we don't have a ton of time left, but leads me into Anton Chuvakin's essay here, story number 9, has a hard time being critical. AI just, thumbs up everything, just gives you a smile, thumbs up, like agrees with everything, will believe everything you say. One of the things came out of what was the other story here? Number 10. Number 10, the author there, Simon, called AI gullible. He uses the term gullible. It just believes whatever you say. Simon Wilson. And I love that description. He's talking about why agents aren't happening yet, and can't really work at this point because we got to figure out this gullibility issue where it's not critical. So we don't have enough people to do it. We can't trust AI to do it. Like we got to figure out some kind of system here that works for vendor responsibility, supply chain, all that stuff.
So bad. I use LLMs all the time. A lot of the time I use it just to see how wrong it is. It's a stupid game that wastes my own time. It hurts nobody but myself. But I've used it so much to look up things and then compare it to what I can do either on my own or what I know from the past, that there are definitely these patterns that start to emerge with your own use. Like the other day I was using it for something or other. And I asked a question about a past election, like a couple decades ago. And one of the LLMs started returning the answer. I'm sorry, I can't answer any questions about politics or elections. And I wasn't even asking a question about politics or elections.
Yeah.
I'd done
it's
that
overcautious.
like 10 prompts prior. And so it doesn't even have the ability to get out of its own way.
Yeah.
And now with the revocation of EO 14110, I think it is, AI is just going to be allowed to run rampant. And again, we're going to have vendors who are more interested in selling their product than they are making sure that the training data that goes in is correct. We're not going to have fact checking on certain we already have lack of fact checking and lack of truth and, quote, our freedom of speech. Still not sure how freedom of speech means intentionally lie, but once all of this gets into our LLMs, it's just not going to be trustworthy at all. And it's one thing, like I saw somebody writing a paper that was very clearly ChatGPT'd, and it's another thing if your SOC is telling you, holy cow, shut this down, or take this offline, or, whatever the case may be. What if it's something with a medical facility and you're dealing with actual human lives or our first responders, and you're getting data from these systems that are meant to protect us, and it's so littered with unreliable data, or like Anton says here, hey, yeah, this is great, go ahead. Well, you could literally lose lives.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody, to go back to do the right thing and the whole bit that we were just discussing, we read things like this, you use AI, LLMs and whatnot, you see some of the weird stuff it does. And then I go look in the news and I see everybody driving full speed towards it.
Yeah.
With no brakes, it's going to do all of this stuff. And the last thing I want a computer to automatically decide, like from my own training and whatnot, I'm just going to shut down this network segment because bad stuff is happening there. It has no context on any of this. It doesn't know what's going on in there and what's happening around it. It just, I saw somebody say, it's AI is statistics, not judgment.
I can't tell you how infuriating it is when someone says, we don't understand what's going on inside these models. I'm like, no, we absolutely understand what's going on inside these models. It's
Did your head explode when you heard that, though, Jackie?
It makes me want to die inside because I'm like, you might not understand what's going on in these models. I definitely understand. And it's this kind of misconception between better and faster. And so because people don't understand LLMs, because it can Google like that and synthesize it, you're like, oh, it's better. No, it's faster. If you sat down with Google and a pad of paper and you did the same Googling and wrote up your own summary, if you are on the right side of the bell curve, odds are you will come up with something better.
Yep.
And so like, I think the good news is that a lot of security companies I'm talking to who are deploying these AI agents, it's mostly for like the tier 1 analyst work, right? The initial data collection, the initial, like that stuff that is very
context gathering. Yeah.
Yes. Stuff that is, like, it doesn't take human like intuition and experience. And it just, I think we talked about this when we were talking about AI red teaming in the previous segment, is that AI is very binary. AI is very straight path. So AI and what people are doing is they're layering, thousands of layers of binary decisions to try to replicate quantum decisions. It's still thousands of layers of binary yes or no's with a straight path towards the fastest solution. And that's not how humans do things. So
yeah, and somewhere like 14 in, it starts drifting in the wrong direction. And then by the time you get to the 1,000, it's just nowhere even close to where you need it. And that's what scares me with all the agentic stuff. We're just going to let these things go off on their own and make decisions for days, unattended, and then talk to other ones who are doing the same.
And like we were talking about, this is all based on knowledge from the internet. So this is I leave my preteens home alone and I'm like, here's Reddit and Google. When I get back, I need you to have swapped out the gas stove. And you've got the internet. So it's everything you need is right there. You guys can swap out the gas stove, right?
I love that example.
And this
It'll
is
go fine.
Everything on the internet is not right.
What?
Yeah. So,
no.
Yeah.
I think you said a key thing a few seconds ago, Jackie. Intuition and experience.
Yeah.
What we're calling AI, the definition of AI, artificial intelligence, includes sentience. We don't have it. And if we can't even get to a fundamental layer of accuracy, I'm not saying 100% of the time, let's go for 92% of the time. Yeah. If we can't even get to that, how are we talking about how AI is sentient? How does it have experience? How does it have intuition? It doesn't. And so we need to be stricter with our models. We need to be more diligent with our algorithms. We need to be a lot more rigorous with what goes into these models.
Or not.
We're just backpedaling because we want everything
let it burn out.
No, I think it's fine to accept that. I think part of the problem is, folks out there ascribing ambitions for this stuff that it's just not capable of meeting. Yeah. Look, today
vendors are selling sentience. So vendors are selling sentience.
It can do really cool, useful stuff.
Yeah,
that's fine. We don't have to claim. We don't have to. Sure, set the goal up there. Go try and do it. But there's a lot of clear problems preventing you from getting from point A to point B there. But yeah, it's. I hate that. We see people. Making claims and stuff like that, because it's just going to burn the technology. It's going to burn something that's potentially useful, but yeah, it's going to be a 10 or 15%, productivity boost for the average person. Claiming 10X and pushing it to do stuff and make decisions and things like that it's just not well suited for, sure. Yeah. Maybe one day we figure out how to get it there. We figure out how to clean up the data. I've seen now that apparently it works really well with synthetic data. It doesn't actually need human created data. Fine, do all those experiments, but it's not going to go well. And I'm glad Anton wrote this humanless sock idiots write up, because it very quickly kind of nails some of the key things here. And it's just people building for a problem that is just much more complex than they realize.
There's an environmental impact. Yeah. Compute is not free. And this is the part that kills me, is compute is not free. The data center industry is approaching 2 times the carbon footprint of the airline industry. Yeah. Compute is very expensive. It produces a shit ton of heat. It needs an insane amount of electricity and water, and lower income communities are being disproportionately impacted by this because in the Midwest, they have no business. So to bring these data centers in, they're just giving them their electricity and water. This is a huge, huge issue. One of the things the next administration just announced was a $50 billion investment by Saudi Arabia in data centers across the US. You know why they're not building them in Saudi Arabia? Because they use too much electricity and water. So what kills me here is do I think Gen AI is cool? Yeah, I think it's great. Do I think we should be heating the environment and using millions of gallons of water so that I can have a digital best friend? No, I don't. And so I'm worried that the over deployment of AI is going to, one, collapse the supply chain because we physically cannot build data centers to keep up with as much AI has been promised for the next 5 years. Like generators are running 3-year lead times. Semiconductors are running 4-year lead times. Chillers are like 3.5 years. And if the supply chain collapses and all of this value has been built on us, assuming that we're going to keep building forever, I mean, it's like a worst case scenario, but I just don't see how it's not going to happen.
I think there is a silver lining, and I think it's that the economics will collapse before we get there.
Because, that's great.
You know,
That's a silver lining.
Already Microsoft is giving away Copilot for free. And
right.
Do you remember when I predicted this, Katie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've been saying this for a while that they will not be able to justify the $360 a year per license, and it will just be built into an E5, whatever existing Microsoft 365 license. And I said within 18 months, and already I saw the other day, not in the enterprise licenses, but in the personal licenses, Copilot is included for free. I don't think
Google
there's
just
any
included
way.
Gemini in Workplace for free as well.
Yeah. And I just started using that as well. Yeah, I saw that. It's I didn't ask for it, but it's there now. And
absent us embracing nuclear power, like full scale, which I don't see happening because our cultural attitude is very much opposed to it. Like nuclear is the only way we're going to come up with enough electricity to meet all of this demand.
And it's not going to come in time. It takes too long to.
Even if you do it, then you got to build all the transmission infrastructure to be able to handle it, because
lay all the fiber lines.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's just
but the $1 trillion plus that Microsoft's valuation has increased, since they started pushing Copilot, like they're never going to be able to sell enough Copilot licenses to make up that gap, so that's going to collapse. And they're starting to stop selling Copilot licenses. So
well,
I think the economics part is going to fail before. Bubble. Yeah.
This feels so .com-y. I think we can all feel it, but if you're under 40, you probably don't remember the hype and that everybody was a website and everybody was but there's very
too much too quick
parallels. Yeah.
If you're brick and mortar, you're going to be out of business next year.
And all those things, like most of them built during the .com era, are businesses today. It just all happened too fast. Like the consumers weren't there, right?
Yeah.
And in some cases, the technology wasn't ready. There was a bunch of garbage being pumped out. There were even a bunch of scams hidden in there as well in the .com bust. But with that, we're running out of time here, so I'm going to move on to our squirrel story. Which, speaking of generative AI, Brian Eno released generative music on a floppy in 1996. And this article, they actually have a recording. Somebody went back and found an old computer, put Windows 3.1 on it, or 3.11, and was playing around with the software and generated some music with it back in November. So there's a YouTube video. Yeah,
music.
I mean, it is. Like, I remember being in college in the 90s, and I remember downloading an application that used fractals to generate music. And you could play with all the inputs and stuff, and you just hit play, and it would just infinitely generate music. And was it very structured music? No, but it was like this stuff. It was pleasant to the ear. Like, it wasn't unpleasant. It wasn't like most people would think, oh, it must be chaotic. It wasn't chaotic at all. Fractals aren't chaotic.
It wasn't. Well, one part of it got a little chaotic in there. I listened to bits and pieces of it. One of the things I noticed as I was clicking through it, I'm like, this sounds different, but it is the same as it was the last 4 places I clicked.
Yeah.
And I'll admit, I'm a little bit of a priss because, I was in band in high school, and I'm playing now a little bit.
Me too.
And you're just like, no, this is not music at all because this isn't going anywhere. Yeah, exactly. There's emotion, there's movement, there's nothing of that in this stuff. So Anyhow,
I
end of
also
my
have
comment.
I have the Casio right here where you can kind of build your own electronic music and stuff. So there's not any real creativity. It's just loops, but it's still fun.
All right, go with fun.
Anyway, I thought that was fun. That was a fun squirrel story. I enjoyed listening to it and listening. And the interface looks very much like Winamp, so I love that. Back then, even my car had an equalizer. Like everything needed to have a graphic EQ on it, right? Like the 90s. All right. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Katie, Jason, Jackie, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a delightful news segment. I think we covered a lot of interesting ground. We got a little bit more political than, no, we usually get political. So yeah, we got a little political.
I try so hard. I do.
How can you not? In this, right now, how can you not? It is directly impacting us. So, all right. And with that, thanks to everybody watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Next week, we'll be talking to Lynn Dome about women in cybersecurity and Ed Gadot about security and healthcare. And we will see you then. Bye-bye.